what do we understand about addiction, and how has our understanding of addiction evolved over the years?
So first of all, we have to be really clear on the fact that when I talk about drug and alcohol use, I'm talking about adolescence. And adolescence is a time when brains are highly plastic, highly susceptible to environmental factors. And, drinking in adolescence is just a lot more dangerous and a lot more damaging to the human brain than it is when you drink or use when you're an adult. We know that kids who are, for example, chronic users of marijuana, pun intended, have smaller hippocampuses, have thinning in their prefrontal cortex, that kind of thing. So, or in their frontal lobe. So, there's damage that can be done during adolescence that is less likely once the brain is done developing and not in that state of incredible plasticity. So there's that. So I'm always interested in just getting kids out of adolescence before they're ingesting things that can mess with their brain development, because I'm a former teacher. What I care about is learning, and what I care about is protecting kids' brains until they're old enough to protect them for themselves. And anyway, that comes to lots of things like head injuries in sports and things like that. Anyway, so what we know is that the best prevention we have is information, that the more kids know about how their brain works and how their brain develops and why drugs and alcohol are more harmful during adolescence than in any other time, why specifically they are drawn to drugs and alcohol, and why that is in terms of their really craving novelty. Teenagers in general have lower baseline levels of dopamine, although they have slightly higher uptake rates. So it's could possibly be a wash. But when they say that life feels boring as a teenager, that could be attributable to their lower baseline levels of dopamine. But the good news is that the way we deal with all of these things, like a craving for novelty and a craving for dopamine, is that, and this all dovetails back nicely with my first book, The Gift of Failure, is that some of the best places to get dopamine are through mastering skills and feeling competent and feeling self-efficacy. You can get bursts of dopamine from that. If we want to manage the fact that kids are highly drawn to novelty, which often confers some risk, pushing kids towards things that confer positive novelty, like trying something new, trying out for play, taking some risk emotionally or academically or whatever. All of these things can help sort of feed that incredible thirst for novelty and dopamine that kids and adolescents have. The big message is delay as long as possible. And in the meantime, use the strengths of adolescence to help them feel good about themselves and build skills and become more competent individuals so that they can go out and be competent adults.
As you described it, I can see that the situation that I was in as a teenager, where I stopped doing pony club, I didn't have any outside clubs. I stopped that when I was 14. I just started hanging around with friends. I was bored. This is like a recipe for getting involved in drugs and alcohol, because you're wanting that dopamine and novelty. And so one of the things I'd always thought after kind of going through that and realizing that wasn't so great was that if I ever have kids, they need to do something when they're in high school. Like, clearly the kids who are in band and in sports, at least like this thing was taking up their time to some degree, and was structuring their lives in a way that my life wasn't structured, that I think seems really important for adolescents. This is a piece of this.
Yes and no. So there's some fine slicing and dicing to be done here. So yes, overall sports have a somewhat protective factor, or protective against substance use, for a couple different reasons, including, needing to stay healthy, having to get up for early practices, all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, the top 4 sports that are actually increased risk for substance use disorder are really the big high contact sports: wrestling, lacrosse, hockey, and football. So, and how much of that has to do with the potential for heads to get knocked around and for there to be potentially a little bit of those concussions are not great for our brains, unclear. But yes, definitely having things that you are intrinsically motivated to do, that feed your soul and your mind and your body, that are, keeping you from getting bored. Absolutely. But as the author of The Gift of Failure, I'm also going to say, is overly scheduling kids great? No, it's not. And then I also have to walk that line of this, which is really tough for me, because we know that kids who are less monitored, watched, controlled, those kids are more likely to initiate drug use younger. But on the other hand, we also know that being highly controlling leads to kids who lie to their parents more often, and they need to be able to build their autonomy and go out there and become competent adults. So there's this fine line to walk when it comes to managing kids too much and controlling kids too much versus letting them have their time together. We know, for example, that summers, when kids are hanging out solely with other teenagers with no adults around, is the recipe for initiation of substance use. But what's the alternative? To keep your teenager home and never ever let them be unsupervised with other teenagers? Well, no, clearly we can't do that. So there's a fair amount of balancing to be done here in adolescence.
So I guess this goes back to this information piece. It's interesting because I can see that in my own child, having them be informed about how screen time and different apps and things are affecting the brain, and having her see the conversations that we're having. And this information I can see is making an impact on the choices that my child makes. I can see that information making an impact. So this idea of talking about substance abuse with kids when they're younger, how young do we start talking about it? Or so how it affects the brain, and how do we start?
Yeah. The best substance use prevention programs, actually ones that have been assessed from objective outside third party people, start in pre-K and kindergarten, which is why the addiction inoculation gives scripts for parents talking about this stuff. And as I've said, this is not like talking to kindergartners about crystal methamphetamine use. This has to do with talking to kindergartners about, why some substances like toothpaste are topical and we don't swallow them because they'll make our stomach upset and they can make us feel a little bit sick. That's something that we put just on our teeth, but we don't ingest into our body. Or why we don't take those pretty Tide Pods and eat those, that kind of thing. That whole protecting your body and understanding that some things aren't meant to go inside the body, they're only for the outside. And then, graduating into a conversation about this pill bottle on the counter that's a prescription for mommy. Why can mommy take this but no one else? Why should I, as the kid, not take this medication that's made for my mommy? And conversations around that are really important as well, because as we know from the statistics, that if kids are going to misuse prescription, for example, opioids, or misuse them, that they are most likely to get those from their own medicine cabinet or a friend's medicine cabinet. So, these conversations are super important, and they have to start really, really young. So yeah, we start pre-K, kindergarten.